Hello, I'm Richard Badley. I'm Head of Innovation at SMRS, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time today talking about organisational network analysis. We're going to cover what it is, why we think it matters as much as it does, and then spend some time looking at some of the applications and insights you get out of it. It will be light touch, it will be definitely introductory, but it's going to set the scene and give a little bit of context to why this topic is as important as it is today and at the moment. So before I dive into it, I just wanted to share a little bit of information and a pre-read if you have time or the inclination. My colleague Ed Late has a video as well as a blog about ONA and why we believe in it, why we use it as an organisation, and work with other organisations to use it. And the context of that blog really is that organisations historically were tower-led, hierarchical from the top down and very structured. And now, because of necessity, because of cultural importance, because of equality, and because of how connected individuals are, intentionally or organically, they're actually more like squares. They're more like market squares. And actually, the importance of understanding structures now and connections is really important. So I do really advise having a look at that content. It's interesting, it's relevant, and it's scene setting. So have a read of that. I haven't got a link on here, sorry, but you'll be able to find it from any of our social channels, and it'll be in the same series. So worth a read. So what is ONA? Network analysis is the formalization of a network. So in its simplest form, that's understanding it, it's applying structures to it, and it's applying sort of models and visuals to a network. So the formalization of a network is network analysis. The largest, I suppose, specialism in this is in social sciences, and it's social network analysis. It's not referring to social media networks that we so commonly think of, like Facebook and TikTok. This is more society networks, so social networks in the sense of how society is connected and how it works. So social network analysis is the large academic and specialist subject. And again, a subset of this that we as an organisation specialise in and are here to talk about today is organisational network analysis. It's the application of the same logic that sits within SNA, but obviously our organisation is focused on the formalisation of an organisation's or professional network. So we're looking at people in businesses effectively. So very, very briefly, that's an introduction to ONA. Now, to provide some context and background of where this comes from and why it matters. This is an individual. This little dot is a person in an organisation. In the world of SNA, this is known as a node, but it's a single entity. And organisations have a lot of data on people. They exponentially, it's growing, but we know that people analytics is a huge area of specialism study. It's the single largest area of interest to global HRDs by quite some amount. So it's growing, it's established, it's growing, and it's not going anywhere. So we know that we have a lot of information on this individual, and we know that we have a lot of information on the individuals around that individual. And where network analysis differs from, if you like, data analysis in its broader, simple term or form, is that what we're doing with organisational network analysis, focused on the network, is understanding links. So this individual in the middle of our chart is linked to and somehow, don't worry about the link, what they mean, but it's linked to those four people around them. There's one degree of separation between that individual centrally and those people. And as we go deeper into the organisation, we understand who they're linked to. So we understand that individual in the middle has 2 degrees of separation from the people at the end of the dashed line. And then further still, you look into how the others are connected. The difference between the understanding that you have when you see dots not connected to when they're connected greatly changes. You understand who's on their own, you understand who's in cliques and who's in very, very connected, dense networks, and you understand the length of a network. So organizational network analysis is taking what you know of the attributes of an organization, but also understanding the connections that exist within an organization. And those networks, those links, that join those nodes, those edges as they're referred to in maths or in social network analysis, could be us looking at collaboration, so understanding who and how we collaborate together. It might be how we communicate, could be who are your friends, socially in our organization, how are you connected? And then you can go through any variable that matters to your project or your organization or the task you're trying to understand. So it might be trust, it might be who influences you, it might be who do you go to for knowledge or insight or strategy, right the way down to identifying brand champions, etc., etc. So really, those links can be anything that you want to understand about your current situation or want to understand how to improve or change. Then you can start applying attributes to your network. So not only do you understand those links, but you also can start applying different levels of detail to those nodes, and you start talking about a multi-mode network or multi-link network. And so you can apply information such as gender or function or tender or salary or location. And when you have a different layering of the links in a business, and you have a varied or in-depth information about those individual nodes, you get a very different picture of an organization. You get an understanding of how work actually gets done, not how it's intended to be done with a hierarchy or a fixed process. So that is a very, very quick introduction to what ONA is. The background of ONA is quite interesting, and I suppose I wanted to do this because I want to understand a little bit more and cement the importance of why connections matter as much as attributes do. So this is a bit of work that comes from Hilbert, Owen and Merge in 2016, and they talk about the evolution of networks. So they talk about the evolutionary forces that sort of sculpt and change networks, but also they link it back to Darwin and how he studied stock exchanges to understand nature, etc., etc. But fundamentally, what we have here is 8 nodes. And the first sort of part of that study, or the way they reference this, is who you are. So those 8 nodes, historically, when we look at attributes, we classify. So we're going to classify those 8 nodes into 2 groups, some white dots and some red dots. Over time, or a period of measurement, they evolve into this outcome. So actually, if I was to pose the question, who are the winner here of the red or the white dots, who's evolved better, who's become more successful, the logical answer and the understandable answer for that would be the white dots. So that's very much looking at the entities in themselves. What are the attributes of those entities, classifying them by those attributes, and then looking at who's grown most. The very nature of the network aspect is more looking at with whom you are. So I'm going to start with the same 2 groups of dots. I've got my white dots and my red dots. I'm not going to alter how they evolve, but what I am going to introduce is links. And what you see in this chart here is that you see that although all the dots are connected, this little clique here is better connected than, and this bottom clique here is also better connected. There's a weak link in the middle. So if we break that weak link, really you have 2 groups here, group 1 on the left and group 2 on the right. Now, if we bring back in the image of evolution or the outcome of how they've evolved, what you'll see here is that actually they are exactly the same size, shape and position, but the question of who's strongest, who's evolved better, is very, very different. Who's evolved better in this example is this group here. So the composition of 1 white and perhaps 3 red. And this application could be applied to anything. It could be a manager and subordinates. It might be perhaps a marketeer and operatives. It might be any value or measure or attribute that we've discussed earlier. So actually you start understanding that the outcome of evolution and situations isn't just based on the individual entities alone, it's based on how those entities are connected. And that's a key component of organizational network analysis. So if we bring that into why this matters to organizations, and I can't stress enough how important this is at the moment in a virtual world when it's very hard to understand a sentiment of a room, a sentiment of a team, and measure emotional engagement or cultural engagement when we're not sitting with each other, when we're not feeling tone. So actually this is critically important anyway. It's amplified with what's going on at the moment. So let's apply the same logic into an organization. So HR data is nothing new. It's becoming incredibly advanced, very, very in-depth. And so what I've got here is I've got a very small table. Sorry, it's tiny, but what we have in the first column is 4 names. So Richard, Ed, Lisa, and Kerry. And HR data traditionally, if you like, with who we are, would tell me a lot. So I've got some examples here. So what location that individual is based in, the tenure within an organization, the salary bracket or band that they might be in, and a performance rating. Now, traditional data science methodologies might suggest that we therefore then do some regression analysis. We look for some modeling in there to say which of the variables are most likely to impact an outcome. So who is it that's likely to leave? Can we predict and understand who might leave the business faster, who might excel or proceed further in the organization? Those things are based on single attributes mashed together to understand the impact that they have and the correlation they have on each other. But if you apply the same with whom we are logic to HR data, you take those nodes, you take those individuals and you map them, you start mapping them, and you start saying, okay, those attributes in that table there are displayed by size, shape, color, position in my network. But I'm going to understand the links between them as well. So I'm going to use, in this one example, there's many ways to do this, both using data or research, if you like, traditional research of engagement. But I'm going to use an adjacency matrix. So I say to you, Richard, who do you talk to, Richard? Who do you communicate with? Who do you rely on to do your job, etc., etc.? Whatever that question might be, we're trying to understand. And Richard tells me that he engages with Ed and he engages with Lisa. So Richard, we have now a directed edge from Richard to Lisa and to Ed. Similarly, I ask Ed the same question. Ed tells me he's connected to everybody. It's fantastic. He's really, really central to the organization, very, very busy. Great news. So some of the arrows have, some of the edges have arrows at both ends now, understandably, and others are single directed. Lisa tells me she's connected to Ed, and Kerry actually isn't connected to anyone, and that's fine. Lots of roles aren't. It's not about setting a benchmark, it's about understanding connections. So what you now have is you still have the information you had within the HR data, but you also understand the connections within an organization and with those 4 people, and you get a very different picture of how an organization works. So to remind ourselves, all of this information can be applied to a number of things. You can map different networks and you can map different links inside networks with a lot of information. So its application is vast, and its insights are incredibly in depth, which makes it exciting, but it also makes it challenging. So let's look at it in practice. Really, it's a little bit like any science or data science or research. It's simple and it's complicated. I think the simple aspect of O&A, and my encouragement to the people we work with or anyone that's considering this, is just have a go. Start with a question or start with research. There's 2 ways you can do this. You can start with an objective to understand something more, or you can start with a desire to answer a question, or you might not understand the definition of that question enough, but you might say, let's understand the connections in our business, and when you have that information, you then convert that into more of an understanding. So really, there's 2 ways you can start it. Answer something or just explore and learn. Where it gets complicated, the flip side of that simplicity, if you like, is actually it's the science. So, A, it's exploratory. B, you have to sometimes adapt and adjust what you're learning as you go. But it is a complicated specialism. So all of these words may mean something, may not, but there's many ways to apply and assess and understand a network. And it might be connectivity, centrality, the diameter of the network, the length of the network. In maths, a lot of the work, and particularly in social science and social network analysis, it's a lot about triangles. It's all about triadic closure. And that gives you an understanding of the density of the network. So actually how many people are connected to each other in closed triangles. But also you can understand and use algorithms to model influencers using PageRank or eigenvector. Modularity is where you start seeing organic tribes. So actually, where are my natural communities existing? Who's really connected organically by how we work, rather than who's forced to connect through role or through process. So there's a huge amount of complication underneath the surface of O&A, as there is with any science. But its application is simple if you start with a question or if you start with research. So I'm going to give you two examples of how this is applied and how it might be applied. And these are very basic, but they're quite simple to understand in a way that how we can use the complex to answer the simple. So this is an organization, something very basic, small, and it's understandable. In every organization, we have roles and departments. So on the left, I might have an IT team. I've got 3 individuals working on projects feeding into an IT manager. They're the red dots. Maybe green's marketing. So it might have APAC, EMEA marketing team leading into a marketing director. And then the white dot in the middle could be ops or could be a leader or whatever it might be. Don't get too locked up. But effectively, you've got kind of 3 types of teams here. Common question, part of network analysis, and we get asked and we think about as individuals inside an organization, is who's most central, who's most connected. And that's quite a simple question. We want to understand who's bringing people together, who's on the path, etc., who's engaged. And actually, the simple answer is, well, one of these 3. The first red one, the white one in the middle, or the green one. And logic, and most people answer that, is probably that one. You know, if I'm looking at who's in the middle of the organization, that one looks like they are. The white one in the middle, that's a simple application or example of how we can apply organizational network analysis. The complicated aspect of that is that's not the right answer, simply because in O&A, there are multiple ways to look at centrality. So most connected, who's most connected? That's called degree centrality. The most connected person is the red one. They have 4 connections to other people. So actually, if you're looking for the cool kid, the person that's got most friends, then the red person is the person that's highly connected. If you want to understand closest to everyone, so actually which one of these nodes or these people has less distance between them and every other node in our network, and you can calculate this manually or you can calculate it using technology, which is fine. It's manually is simple to do on this example, but it's complex when you're looking at thousands of nodes. But the closest to everyone is actually the marketing manager, marketing director. And similarly, you ask another type of centrality is betweenness centrality. So who's on the most paths? So if I was going to go from every node to every other node, who would be in between? And that's where you use that kind of analysis to understand gatekeepers, to understand people in the way of communication, or amplifiers of information. So again, you've got the marketing director. So actually, where SNA or ONA becomes useful is that you apply a science to understand answers that are far more complex than initially thought, such as who's in the middle. Second example here might be the question of how well do our teams connect. So commonly you want to understand how well teams in organizations work together, intentionally or organically. So one way to do that is to ask them. The simple way and the common usual way, if you like, is to ask individuals or teams who else they engage with. And we're going to have a similar adjacency matrix here. So IT say they work with marketing and C-suite. Marketing say they work with C-suite and sales. And C-suite, of course, they're leaders. They work with everyone, so they say. And sales equally work with everyone. That's called active data collection. You can ask and you actively gather the information. A part of SNA that we do and we're seeing more of as technology and virtual work lives start becoming more prominent is you use passive data collection. So that's where we aggregate and automate the gathering of mass information from all the technology that we communicate on, and we model that and map that. And actually what you then see is a very different outcome. You see that IT are actually talking way more to sales. They didn't think they were, but they are. And they're talking a little bit to marketing and C-suite. So you start getting an understanding of 2 different ways to model these networks, and you lay them on top of each other, and you get a multiplex or a multimodal network. So that's an example of O&A in practice, is using data and research to understand the connections in teams, both organically and from a subjective subjective position. So again, it's very vast. They're two very, very simple examples. How are we connected as an organisation, and who's most central in our organisation? And we can do examples, or there are examples for all of these ways. Who's influencing? Who's living the brand values? Who's the most effective recruiter? Who's the most connected leader? And all these examples can be brought to life with simple applications of the simple approach against the complex approach. So I just wanted to very, very quickly show my network, actually, the network in which I exist, and some of the insight and the analysis that I play with or we're doing as an organisation to understand. So this is my network. These are my fantastically wonderful colleagues, and I've stripped away the office they're based in, the country they're based in. I've stripped out all data associated to them. And the first thing we're looking at here is a force-directed algorithm, so a visual picture of the company I work. And where the dots sit and the size of the dots is all connected to how we actually work. This is a visual of how connected we are, agnostically to all of the information that we as an organisation apply to people, like role and tenure and salary. So actually, where they sit, so this tells me the dot in the top left has very little engagement and communication with the blue dot in the bottom right, etc., etc. But then you apply some further analytical techniques, and you say, well, show me the natural communities. Show me, regardless of my formal structure, how many natural groups there are in our organisation existing. And you see we've got 4, and you see the sort of shape and tenure and who's closest to who and where the divides are. So that's quite a common place to start, is show me my natural communities in my organisation. We're looking at how our different teams connect. So then you apply a colour coding to the organic teams. So you say, okay, well, knowing that, then let's remodel this and show me how my teams connect to understand whether certain teams simply aren't engaging with others. Is that okay? Is that what we expect? Or do we need to do something about that or assist that connection and engagement? And then how do we use Office 365 and the communication technologies? So the middle one is, and I appreciate these are very small, but is a massive map of every single communication in and out of our organisation on every single digital measure. There's no information on the connections or on the information of what is being exchanged. This is about who's linked to who and how we link together, not the information within it. And then you can do even sort of, subjective influence-led questions, like who creates a positive culture, who lives our brand values. And all of these questions are remapped in different visual ways with different algorithms and different models to understand how organizations work. And again, of course, it can all be then exported and remodeled using data science and regression when you have new values attributed to your colleagues. So that's a little bit of a snippet of the network in which I exist. It's vast and it's exciting. We can understand how connected people are and different teams are and different groups are. We can understand information on individuals. Who's at risk? Who's a rising star? Who's a gatekeeper? Who's an influencer? How long does it take for someone to become connected when they join our organization? How does work get done? How does technology help people connect or not? All of these things is an output or a byproduct of network analysis rather than attribution modeling or understanding attributes and then analyzing that in its individuality. We're only just scratching the surface. It's really exciting. There is a lot of work you can do in network analysis to look at cost and benefit. So to understand when a network is stable and efficient and when it's not, as well as understanding cliques for benefit or not, prediction, modeling, etc. Again, it's a data science, it's a science. So actually you can apply all of those logics to forecast how networks will grow, where bottlenecks will exist, where pressure points exist, who's at risk. So again, the application is fast. This is a very quick, garbled introduction to it, but I hope it's eye-opening to those that have no exposure to it and encourages perhaps a consideration for exploration in the future. Again, I remind you, if you want to have a go and get started and explore it, you think of it as a methodology to answer a question you may already have or you want to answer about your organization, or don't overthink it, just start doing some analysis. It's not hard to get started at all. And when you have that initial output from the research, then you can use it as an asset to answer questions that may well be raised to you or your colleagues or from your organization in the future. There'll be more to come in this series. it might be me, it might be my colleagues, but we're doing more and more of this. We're looking for partner organisations to work with to understand their own organisations. So get in touch. My details are there, or I'll be accessible via LinkedIn or SMRS's sites. But genuinely very excited to bring more of this content forward in the future, and I hope to someday network with you and perhaps work with you on your own organisational networks.